Nathan Cole pulled that hiring notice off the post himself the morning he found her. He hadn't meant to hire anyone that day. He'd meant to ride back up the mountain alone the way he always did. But there she was standing at his gate with no shoes on her feet, a torn dress and a wooden box pressed against her chest like it was the only thing left in the world that belonged to her. She didn't beg. She just looked at him and said, "I can work." And something in Nathan Cole that had been locked shut for 11 years cracked open. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel right now because we're just getting started. Drop your city in the comments below. Let me see how far this story travels. The hiring notice had been Nathan Cole's idea, and he was already regretting it. He'd nailed it to the post outside Caldwell's general store on a Tuesday morning, a plain piece of paper. 12 words, nothing fancy. Farmhand needed. Hard work. Fair pay. Cole Ranch. Ask for Nathan. He'd ridden back up the mountain before the ink was dry, telling himself he needed the help, that the south pasture wasn't going to fence itself, that he couldn't keep running 140 head of cattle and a horse breeding operation alone. Telling himself all the practical things a practical man was supposed to tell himself. What he didn't tell himself, what he refused to think about, was that the cabin had been quiet for 11 years. And the quiet had started to feel like something alive. Something that pressed against his chest at night when he sat down to eat supper alone. Nathan Cole was 38 years old. He stood 6'2" in his boots, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of hands that showed every year of the work he'd put into this land. His hair was dark brown going to silver at the temples. His jaw was set in a way that people in Hatchet Creek had learned to read as "don't push." Not because he was cruel, but because he was a man who'd decided somewhere along the way that walls were easier to maintain than wounds. He'd built this ranch with his father and his younger brother Owen. They'd come up to the Colorado Rockies in the summer of 1872, when Nathan was 27, 3 men with a dream, 2 good horses, and enough stubbornness to move a mountain. They'd done it right too. Cleared the land, built the cabin, ran the fence line through rock and root until Nathan's hands bled. His father had called it the best summer of his life. His father had been dead 9 years now. Owen had been dead 7. Nathan had stayed. He'd stayed because someone had to, and because leaving felt like abandoning the only proof that those 2 men had ever existed. He'd stayed, and he'd worked, and he'd built the ranch into something that other men respected from a distance, and never got close enough to really know. That was fine with Nathan. He didn't need anyone to know him. He needed the fences up and the horses healthy, and the cattle moved to the high pasture before July heat set in. That was what he needed. That was what he told himself when he rode back down the mountain on Thursday afternoon and saw the figure standing at his gate. He spotted her from 200 yards out. A woman. Standing outside the gate rather than coming through it, which told him something right there. Either she had manners or she had sense. And in his experience, those often came together. She wasn't moving, just standing with her back straight and her chin up the way a person stands when they're trying not to look afraid. Nathan slowed his horse Ranger to a walk. As he got closer, the details settled in one by one, each one landing harder than the last. Her dress was blue, or had been blue once. Now it was faded and torn along the hem, and there was a dark stain on the left sleeve that looked old. Her dark hair was pulled back, but pieces of it had come loose and were blowing across her face in the afternoon wind. She was holding a small wooden box against her chest, with both arms the way you'd hold something breakable. Or something precious. And she had no shoes. Not worn-down shoes, not boots with the soles giving out. No shoes at all. Her feet were bare on the rocky ground in front of his gate, and the skin was dirty and cut in places, and Nathan felt something move through him that he hadn't felt in a long time. Something he didn't have a name for. Something that sat uncomfortably between anger and grief. He brought Ranger to a stop 10 feet from the gate and looked down at her. She looked up at him. Her eyes were gray, a deep, serious gray that made him think of storm clouds over the mountain peaks. She looked young, 25, maybe 27, and she looked tired in the way that had nothing to do with a bad night's sleep. It was a tiredness that went down to the bone. "You're Mr. Cole," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Nathan said. "I saw your notice." She shifted the wooden box slightly in her arms. At Caldwell's store. I posted it for a farmhand, Nathan said. He kept his voice even, but he was watching her feet. I know what you posted it for. There was something quiet and steady in her voice that surprised him. No apology in it, no pleading. I'm asking if the position is still open. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down the road behind her the way she'd come. There was nothing there. No wagon, no horse, no bag except the wooden box she was holding. Where'd you come from? He asked. Town, she said. Hatchet Creek is 4 miles down that road. I'm aware of that. You walked 4 miles. He glanced at her feet again. Without shoes. Something shifted behind her eyes, not shame, not embarrassment, but something quieter. Something more painful than either of those things. The shoes I had weren't mine to keep, she said. So I left them. Nathan sat with that for a moment. Then he swung down from Ranger and walked to the gate and opened it. Come in then, he said. Before you cut your feet any worse than you already have. Stunned. Her name was Clara Whitmore. She told him that in the kitchen, sitting at his table, with her feet on a clean cloth he'd put down without really thinking about it, while he found the tin of salve his father used to keep on the shelf above the door. He wasn't a man who talked much, and she wasn't pushing him to. She just sat there and watched him with those gray eyes while he crouched down and looked at the cuts on the soles of her feet. They weren't deep, but they were real, and they had to hurt, and she hadn't made a sound walking across the yard. You don't have to do that, she said quietly. I know I don't, Nathan said. He opened the tin. Hold still. She held still. He worked quickly and without ceremony the way he'd patch up a horse that had caught itself on wire, careful, thorough, no fuss. When he was done, he stood up and set the tin back on the shelf and washed his hands at the basin. I can cook, Clara said, and clean. I'm good with animals, horses especially. I can mend clothes and I can keep books if you need records kept. I'm not asking for much, just a place to work and a place to sleep. Nathan dried his hands and turned to look at her. Where are you from, Miss Whitmore? A pause. Small, but he caught it. Ohio originally, she said. Before that doesn't matter much. Before that meaning it's not part of what I'm offering you, she said. What I'm offering you is my work. That's all. He studied her face. She didn't look away. Most people, when Nathan Cole studied them like that, found something else to look at. Clara Whitmore looked back at him with the patience of someone who had learned to hold her ground by necessity. You're running from something, he said. I'm running toward work, she said. Which I believe is what you advertised. There was a long silence. Somewhere outside, Ranger moved in the paddock. The afternoon light coming through the kitchen window was starting to go gold. There's a room off the back of the cabin, Nathan said finally. Small. Used to be my brother's. He paused. It has a door with a latch. The latch works. Clara absorbed that the implication of it, the fact that he'd thought to say it, and something in her posture changed. A very slight loosening. Like a knot coming undone one thread at a time. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Nathan said. The work starts at sunup. She was up before sunup. Nathan came out of his room at first light and found the kitchen fire already going, the coffee pot already on, and Clara Whitmore standing at the window with a cup in her hands, looking out at the mountain. She'd found one of the old work shirts Owen had left hanging on the back of the door and put it on over her torn dress. It was 3 sizes too big, and she'd rolled the sleeves up to her elbows. She heard him come in and turned. Good morning, she said, and then, I didn't touch anything I shouldn't have. Just the firewood and the coffee tin. The coffee smells right, Nathan said. That's enough. He poured himself a cup and stood beside her for a moment, both of them looking out the same window at the mountains, going from black to deep blue to purple in the early light. The Rockies didn't ease into the morning. They announced it. Sharp edges and enormous silence, and the first birdsong cutting through like something brave. It's beautiful, Clara said. Quiet. Like she wasn't really talking to him. Like she'd forgotten for just 1 second to be guarded. Nathan looked at the mountain he'd been looking at for 11 years. It is, he said. Gentureg. The first week was work and only work, and that suited Nathan fine. She wasn't lying about what she could do. Clara Whitmore could cook real food, not just beans and cornbread, but meals that smelled like something, and tasted like something, and made Nathan realize how long he'd been eating just to eat, rather than eating like a human being. She kept the cabin clean without being asked. She mended the pile of shirts he'd let stack up in the corner. She fixed the loose hinge on the back door that he'd been meaning to fix since April. But the horses were where he first understood that she was something different. He had 14 horses in his breeding operation, 3 mares heavy with foal, 2 stallions, and 9 quarter horses he was training for sale. They were good animals, and he knew them well, and they trusted him in the careful, reserved way horses trust the person who feeds them and doesn't hurt them. On the 3rd morning, he found Clara in the paddock with Duchess, his oldest mare, 17 years old, and mean-tempered since she'd lost a foal 2 springs back. Duchess didn't let anyone near her except Nathan. She'd bitten 2 of the ranch hands he'd hired the previous fall, and both of them had quit the same day. Clara was standing sideways to her, not looking directly at the horse, just standing there, one hand slightly out to the side, talking in a low voice that Nathan couldn't make out from where he was standing at the fence. He watched. Duchess's ears moved. She was listening. Her head came down a fraction of an inch. Clara didn't push it. She didn't reach for the horse, didn't turn toward her, didn't do anything but keep talking in that low, steady voice. And slowly, so slowly, Nathan almost didn't believe what he was seeing. Duchess took 1 step toward her. Then another. Clara let her come, waited until the mare's nose was nearly at her shoulder, and then without turning, raised her hand very slowly, until she was touching the horse's jaw. And Duchess, broken-hearted Duchess, who had bitten a hole in Nathan's best saddle blanket, leaned into it. Nathan gripped the fence rail. Clara heard him. She looked over her shoulder and found him standing there, and something passed across her face that might have been the beginning of a smile. She just needed someone to wait, Clara said. Nathan didn't answer, but he thought about it for the rest of the day. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, 11 days in, that he found out about the letter. He'd come back from riding the south fence line to find Clara sitting on the porch step with the wooden box open on her knees. She was holding a piece of paper, a letter, and reading it, and she didn't hear him coming until Ranger's hooves hit the yard. She looked up fast, the kind of fast that comes from being startled, and for just a moment he saw something on her face that looked like fear. Then she recognized it was him, and the fear went away. But it left something else behind. A tired kind of resignation that bothered him more than the fear had. She folded the letter, put it back in the box, closed the lid. "Good ride?" she asked. "South fence needs another hour of work," Nathan said. He unsaddled Ranger and turned him out, taking his time. Then he came and sat on the porch rail. Not close, just present. After a moment he said, "You don't have to tell me." "I know," Clara said, "but if someone's looking for you—" "No one's looking yet," she said. Then quieter. "The letter is from my sister. She's telling me to come back." "Back where?" Clara looked at the box. "Back to a man named Gerald Harrow. In Denver. He's—" She stopped. Started again. "He's the man my father arranged for me to marry, before my father died." She looked up at the mountains. "I met Gerald Harrow 4 times. The 4th time I ran." Nathan was quiet. "He's a wealthy man," she said. "He has lawyers. He has a great deal of influence in Denver." She said it the way you'd say the mountain is very tall, a fact, not a complaint. "My sister believes that returning and going through with it is the only sensible path, that I'm being foolish, that no one will hire me, no one will take me in, and that eventually I'll have no choice." She looked at him, then straight and level. "She didn't know about your notice?" Clara said. "She didn't know I'd find work." "And if Harrow comes looking," Nathan said. Clara's jaw tightened. "Then I hope I've made myself useful enough that it becomes a more complicated question," she said. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "You're useful," he said. "That's not complicated." Something happened in her eyes when he said it, something quick and unguarded that she covered almost immediately. But he'd seen it. The way a single sentence could land on a person who hadn't heard a decent one in a long time. He didn't say anything more about it. He got up and went inside. But he found himself that night thinking about a man named Gerald Harrow, and thinking about what kind of man needed lawyers to bring a woman back. The summer moved the way mountain summers do, hard and bright and over, before you're ready for it to be. Nathan Cole had always been a man who noticed small things. It was part of what made him good with horses, good with land, good at reading weather and terrain, and the thousand small signals that told you what was coming. He noticed the way a creek ran different before a storm, the way a horse's weight shifted when something was wrong with a hoof, the angle of a man's shoulders when he was lying. He started noticing Clara Whitmore the way he noticed everything, carefully, without making a show of it. He noticed that she hummed to herself when she thought she was alone. Old hymns, mostly the kind he remembered from his mother's kitchen. He noticed that she kept the wooden box under her bed, and touched it every morning like a habit, like she needed to make sure it was still there. He noticed that she had a slight hesitation before she spoke in any group of more than 2 people, like she'd been trained to make herself smaller, and that she was working consciously, deliberately to stop doing it. He noticed that she laughed exactly once in the first 2 weeks. He'd said something dry about the south pasture fence and its grudge against him, and the laugh had come out of her before she could stop it, real and unguarded and startled, like she'd surprised herself. She'd covered it quick, pressing her fingers to her mouth, and he'd looked away before she could feel watched, but he'd heard it. And for reasons he didn't examine too closely, he found himself in the following days saying dry things about fence posts more often than was strictly necessary. The trouble came from town. It always did. He'd ridden in for supplies on a Friday, which he normally avoided. Friday was when the men with nothing to do had had time to find grievances. But he needed wire, and he needed it before the weekend, and so he tied Ranger outside Caldwell's and went in. Caldwell himself said nothing. He was a decent man who kept his opinions where they belonged, which was behind the counter and out of other people's business. But 3 other men were in the store when Nathan walked in, and one of them was Dale Prentice. Prentice owned the largest spread in the lower valley. He was 45 and loud, in the way that men are loud when they've never been told to be quiet. He turned from the counter when Nathan came in and gave him a look that was somewhere between amused and contemptuous. "Cole," he said, "heard you've got a woman up at your place." Nathan took his list out of his pocket and handed it to Caldwell. "Morning, Caldwell. Whenever you're ready." "Where'd you find her?" Prentice said. "Woman showing up barefoot, no bag, no horse. You know what kind of woman that makes her." The other 2 men said nothing. One of them studied the floor. The other one watched to see what Nathan would do. Nathan turned and looked at Prentice with the expression that people in Hatchet Creek had learned to read correctly. "She's my hired help," Nathan said. "She cooks, she works, she earns her wages. What she was before she got to my ranch is none of your business, and what she does now is none of your business, and I'd suggest you find a different direction to point your mouth." Prentice's face reddened. "I'm just saying what people are saying, Cole." "People can say whatever they want," Nathan said. "They generally do. Doesn't make it true." He looked back at Caldwell. "I'll take the wire when you're ready." He left Prentice standing in his own silence, which was the best place to leave a man like that. But riding back up the mountain, he was thinking about something else now. About the way a town could decide what a person was worth based on how they arrived. About the way that kind of deciding, once it started, was hard to stop. He was thinking about Clara, and about Gerald Harrow's lawyers, and about how much time they probably had before either one of those things came up the mountain. That evening, Nathan came in from the barn to find Clara standing at the table with a piece of leather and a knife, cutting carefully and deliberately. In front of her were the rough shapes of what would eventually be, he squinted, shoes. "Whose hide is that?" he asked. "Yours," she said without looking up. "There was a piece left from the saddlery repair last week. I asked your permission. You said yes." "I did. You said use whatever's in the repair pile that isn't already spoken for." She looked up, then one eyebrow slightly raised. "I have a good memory, Mr. Cole." "Nathan," he said, because she'd called him Mr. Cole for 2.5 weeks, and it was starting to feel strange. She blinked. Then, "Nathan." He went to wash up, and he didn't say anything else about it, but when he came back to the table, she'd set the leather aside, and the supper was on the table. And they sat down across from each other, the way they did every night. The same 2 chairs, the same table, the same mountain outside the window, going dark. And it occurred to Nathan Cole that it had been 11 years since this table felt like it had the right number of people at it. He didn't say that. He would not have known how to say that. But he thought it. There was a night toward the end of July when the heat broke late and a thunderstorm came over the mountains fast and mean. Nathan was still in the barn when it hit, securing the horses working in the dark with a lantern, because the lightning was making them nervous. He was talking them down one by one, low, steady, the same way he'd watched Clara do with Duchess when the barn door opened and Clara came in. She was soaked. She'd come out without thinking, probably just reacted to the sound of the horses. She didn't ask him what to do. She went straight to Duchess's stall. Of course she did. And she put her hand through the bars and started talking in that low, steady voice, while the thunder rolled across the sky outside like something enormous moving furniture. Nathan worked his way down the row toward her. When he got close enough to hear, she was saying something quiet and rhythmic. Not words he could make out, just sounds, the cadence of a lullaby maybe, or a hymn without the words. Duchess had her head pressed against Clara's arm. They stayed like that, all 3 of them, the horses quieting one by one, the storm going on overhead until the worst of it was past. Then Clara looked at him across the top of Duchess's stall and said, "I hope I didn't overstep." "You didn't," Nathan said. She nodded. She was dripping on the barn floor. Her hair was half down. She looked like she'd run through a river to get here, and she had the expression of someone who had simply decided that the horses needed her. And so here she was, consequences to herself be damned. Nathan handed her the lantern to carry back. They walked to the cabin together in the dark, neither one of them talking, the rain still coming down soft now that the worst was over. When they reached the porch, she paused and looked up. The clouds were breaking. You could see stars through them, just a few scattered and bright between the moving dark. "I used to be afraid of storms," she said. "Not anymore," he asked. She thought about it. "I ran so far and so fast that I think I scared myself more than any storm could," she said. And then she went inside. Nathan stood on the porch for a little while after that, listening to the drip of rain off the eaves, looking up at those scattered stars. He was beginning to understand that Clara Whitmore had not arrived at his gate by accident. Or rather, the accident didn't matter. What mattered was what she'd done once she was here. What she'd made of it. He was beginning to understand something else too. But he didn't push it. He was a man who'd learned the hard way that some things had to come in at their own pace, like horses, like trust, like the slow, stubborn return of something you'd convinced yourself was gone for good. He finished the shoes on a Sunday. He'd been working on them quietly in the barn in the evenings after she'd gone to her room. He was no cobbler. They were rough, plain things. Nothing like what a woman might have chosen for herself. But the leather was good, and he'd done it right, and they had proper soles and proper stitching, and they would hold together through hard work, which was all that really mattered. He left them outside her door on a Monday morning before sunup. No note, no explanation. He was halfway across the yard when he heard the door open behind him. He didn't stop walking. "Nathan!" He stopped. Her voice was different. He couldn't put a word to how. He turned around. She was standing in the doorway, holding the shoes. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her yet. Something open and unguarded, and a little unsteady, like the ground had shifted under her, and she was still finding her footing. "You made these," she said. Seemed like something that needed doing, he said. She looked down at them, then back up at him. No one's... She stopped, started again. Thank you. He tipped his hat, turned back toward the barn, but he was smiling. Not so she could see it, just privately, to himself, and to the mountains. The shoes changed something, not in any way Nathan could have named or explained, but they did. Clara wore them the next morning and the morning after that, and every morning after that, and something about seeing her move through the yard in those rough plain shoes. Shoes he'd cut and stitched himself. Shoes that fit her, because he'd measured the outline of her foot. By the impression she'd left in the barn floor, dust settled something in him that he hadn't known was unsettled. She didn't make a fuss about them. That was the thing he appreciated most. She put them on, and she worked in them, and once when he was replacing a rotted post near the paddock gate, and she was passing by with a bucket of water for the horses, she paused and said, "They're holding up well." And he said, "Good leather." And that was the entire conversation. But she was smiling when she walked away, and he let himself notice that. He was letting himself notice things. That was new. Clara noticed him noticing too, though she didn't say so. She was a careful woman. She'd learned careful the way people learn it when carelessness has cost them something real, something that couldn't be gotten back. She watched Nathan, the way he watched his horses, with patience, with attention, with the understanding that trust was not a thing you demanded, but a thing you waited for, and that the waiting was part of the respect. What she saw in those first weeks of August was a man coming back from somewhere far off, not rushing, not making a show of it, just returning slowly to the surface of his own life. She kept that observation to herself, but she held it carefully the way she held the wooden box, like something worth protecting. The work between them settled into a rhythm. Nathan rode the upper pasture in the mornings, checking on the cattle, reading the land, the way a man reads a book he's memorized, but still comes back to. Clara handled the barn in his absence, feeding watering cleaning stalls, and when he returned at midday, she had food on the table and the books open if there was accounting to do. In the afternoons, they sometimes worked the same task. Fence repair mostly, or training the quarter horses he had earmarked for sale in September. It was the horse work that opened things up between them. Nathan had a bay gelding 3 years old, green-broke, smart as a whip, and twice as nervous that he'd named Copper for the color of him. Copper had the talent to be an exceptional working horse, and the anxiety to ruin himself if handled wrong. He spooked at sound. He spooked at shadow. He spooked at things Nathan could not identify, which was the most frustrating kind of spooking. He'd been working Copper for 6 weeks with moderate success and considerable aggravation. And then one afternoon, Clara came out to the training pen and leaned on the rail and watched, and after about 10 minutes she said, "He's watching your hands." Nathan stopped. "What?" "When you tighten your grip on the lead, he tenses. He's reading your tension before it becomes anything else." She tilted her head. "He's not reacting to the outside. He's reacting to you." Nathan stood with that for a moment. "You want to try," he said. She looked at him. He saw the surprise move across her face. He'd said it simply, no qualification, no just to see, or if you want just a clean offer, one professional to another. He meant it that way, and apparently she heard it that way because she came through the gate without another word, and he handed her the lead. She worked Copper for 40 minutes. Nathan watched from the fence. At the end of it, the horse was walking figure eights around her at a loose trot, head down, relaxed in the way that horses are relaxed when they've decided the world is probably not going to kill them today. "Where'd you learn that?" Nathan asked. "My grandfather had horses," Clara said. She was stroking Copper's neck. "He said a frightened horse isn't stupid. It's just listening to the wrong voice. Your job is to become the loudest right voice in the room." She looked at Copper. "Or the pen." Nathan thought about that for longer than he let on. 3 days later, he gave her Copper to train. It wasn't a small thing. In a horse operation, handing over the training of a sale animal was the kind of trust that meant something. Clara received it without fanfare, just a nod and a "I won't let you down." And Nathan said, "I know you won't," and went back to the fence line. But he came back in time to watch her work every afternoon. And he stopped pretending that was an accident. The second week of August brought a visitor. His name was Elias Bright, and he was a circuit preacher who came through Hatchet Creek every 6 weeks or so, staying at different ranches along his route, sharing supper and scripture and the kind of small-town news that traveled faster on horseback than it did by telegram. Nathan had known Elias for 8 years. He was a lean, sharp-eyed man of 60, with silver hair and a way of listening that made people tell him more than they intended to. He arrived on a Tuesday evening, just as supper was being set on the table, which Nathan suspected was not entirely a coincidence with Elias. Clara set a third place without being asked. Nathan watched Elias watch her do it and keep his expression carefully neutral, which told Nathan that Elias had already heard something in town. They ate. Elias talked about his circuit, about the families he'd visited, about a drought threatening the lower valley ranches. Clara asked a question or two. Quiet ones, specific ones, the kind that showed she was actually listening. Elias answered them with a slight brightening of his attention that Nathan recognized as the reaction of a man who was used to talking past people and had encountered someone who was actually present. After supper, Clara cleared the table and said goodnight with a quiet composure that Nathan had come to recognize as her armor polished seamless, betraying nothing, and went to her room. Elias waited until her door was closed. "She's not what they're saying in town," he said. "I know that," Nathan said. "Dale Prentice is saying she's a runaway wife." "She's not a wife. He doesn't know that, or doesn't care." Elias turned his cup in his hands. "There's also a name being mentioned, a man from Denver, someone asking questions through a lawyer's office in Colorado Springs." Nathan set his coffee down. "Gerald Harrow," he said. Elias looked at him steadily. "You know about him." "I know enough." "Then you know he has money and influence and the kind of patience that comes with both." Elias paused. "He's not asking where she is yet. He's asking who she might have gone to. What kind of people might have taken her in." He held Nathan's eyes. "Your name will come up eventually, Nathan. You posted a public notice." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then, "What are you suggesting I do, Elias?" "I'm not suggesting anything," the preacher said. "I'm telling you what's coming so you can decide what you want to do before it gets here." He stood up and picked up his hat. A man who decides before he has to is a man in control of his own life. A man who waits for circumstances to decide for him is just along for the ride. He said goodnight and went to the spare room, and Nathan sat at the table for a long time after that, in the same chair he always sat in, looking at the same empty chair across from him that wasn't empty anymore at supper time. He thought about Gerald Harrow and his lawyer in Colorado Springs. He thought about Clara's hands on Copper's lead, calm and steady and utterly sure of themselves. He thought about the wooden box under her bed. He didn't sleep well that night, and in the morning before she came out to start the fire, he stood in the kitchen in the early dark and made a decision about whose side he was on. Not out loud, not with any ceremony. Just a quiet interior settling like a stone finding its place at the bottom of clear water. He was on hers, whatever that cost. He didn't tell her about Elias's warning right away. He needed to think about how to say it, and thinking for Nathan Cole was rarely a fast operation. He turned things slowly, the way you work a tight knot a little at a time from different angles until the right approach showed itself. What he did instead was watch. He watched for signs that she was afraid, that she'd gotten word somehow that she was pulling back, preparing to run again. He watched for the careful, sealed expression she'd had that first day at the gate, that "I'm not asking for much" face, that "I know I'm trouble" face coming back. It didn't come back. What he saw instead was Clara Whitmore making herself a part of things. She started keeping the household accounts without being asked, and she was better at it than he was. Methodical, precise, with a dry commentary on certain expenditures that made him look up from whatever he was doing to check whether she was joking. She usually was. Half joking anyway, with one corner of her mouth tucked up and her eyes on the ledger. He found he liked the half jokes. They were the kind that asked nothing of him in return, didn't need to be answered, just landed and sat there, and made the room feel slightly different. She found his brother Owen's old guitar in the back of the storage closet and asked about it. Nathan told her Owen had played it. She said, did he play well? And Nathan said better than he should have for how little he practiced. And there was a pause. And then Clara said, would you mind if I played it sometimes? And Nathan said no, and that was that. She played it on the porch in the evenings after supper, when the day's work was done, and the light was doing that thing it did in the high country in August, going amber and then rose, and then a deep, impossible blue before the dark came in. She didn't play flashy. She played the way she did most things, steadily, carefully, with complete attention. Hymns mostly, some ballads. Once something Nathan didn't recognize, something slower and sadder, and he sat in the other porch chair with his coffee and didn't ask what it was because it felt like something private. She stopped when she noticed him listening too hard. Sorry, she said. I'll stop. Don't, Nathan said. Then, because that came out rougher than he meant it, it's Owen's guitar. It should be played. She looked at him for a moment with those gray eyes that didn't miss much. You miss him, she said. Not a question. Every day, Nathan said. He hadn't said that out loud in 7 years. He wasn't sure why he said it now except that it was true, and Clara Whitmore had a way of sitting with truth without making it uncomfortable. She didn't say, I'm sorry, or he must have been wonderful, or any of the things people said when they were filling space. She just nodded once and went back to playing. Something quieter this time. Something that asked nothing of the night except to pass gently. Nathan drank his coffee and listened. And for the first time in a long time, the porch didn't feel like the loneliest place on earth. Sei. The twist came on a Friday morning, and it came in the form of a boy. He was maybe 14, riding a horse that had been ridden hard, showing up at the gate just after dawn with a folded paper and a look on his face like he'd been paid to deliver something and wanted very much to be gone as soon as the delivery was made. Nathan took the paper. The boy left at a trot. He stood in the yard and read it. It was not a legal document. Not yet. It was a letter written in the measured, expensive language of a man who employed lawyers to write his correspondence formal enough to be a warning, informal enough to have deniability. It was addressed to Mr. Nathan Cole Ranch, Hatchet Creek, Colorado Territory. It was signed on behalf of Mr. Gerald Harrow Denver. The substance of it was simple. Mr. Harrow had reason to believe that a Miss Clara Whitmore, formerly of Denver, and currently in breach of a contractual agreement of considerable legal standing, was residing at Nathan Cole's ranch. Mr. Harrow requested that Miss Whitmore be made available for collection within the fortnight, failing which Mr. Harrow would be compelled to pursue the matter through the appropriate territorial authorities and civil courts, which would of course necessitate an examination of any and all individuals who might be found to have assisted in Miss Whitmore's departure. An examination. Nathan read that word twice. He folded the letter. He stood in the yard for a while. Then he went inside, poured 2 cups of coffee, set one on the table in front of Clara's chair, and sat down in his own chair and waited. She came in from the barn 5 minutes later, stopped when she saw his face, and sat down. She looked at the letter in his hand. He found me, she said. His lawyer found you, Nathan said. There's a difference. Not really. Her voice was flat. She'd gone very still the way she went still when she was managing something, keeping it contained, keeping it from spilling. I knew it would happen. I told myself I had more time. How long? Nathan asked. I left Denver in May. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. Almost 3 months. What did he say you breached? The letter said a contractual agreement. Clara was quiet for a moment. My father was in debt when he died, she said. Gerald Harrow bought the debt. The arrangement was, I would marry Harrow and the debt would be forgiven. My sister's family would keep the house. She looked at the table. It wasn't a marriage agreement. It was a transaction. Nathan looked at her. Did you sign anything? My father signed on my behalf, before he died. That's... Nathan stopped, started again carefully. A man can't sell a woman. Gerald Harrow has a lawyer who would argue otherwise, Clara said. And enough money to make that argument very loudly, and for a very long time. Silence. Nathan set the letter on the table between them and looked at it like it was something he was deciding whether to step on. "How much was the debt?" he asked. $412. He looked up. She looked back at him with an expression that said, "Yes, I know what you're thinking," and "No, don't," all at the same time. "Nathan, $400 is not an unreachable number," he said. "You are not paying Gerald Harrow $400 on my behalf," Clara said, firm, clear, no softness in it. "I will not allow that. You'll allow what I decide to do with my own money." "Not when it concerns me," she said. "I am not a debt to be settled. I am not something that gets passed from one man who bought me to another man who bought me out." Her voice didn't rise. That was the most striking thing. It didn't rise, it didn't shake, it just went very, very level. "Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" Nathan was quiet. Then, "Yes," he said. "I understand." She looked at him for a moment longer, checking. Then something released slightly in her posture. "I can leave?" she said. "If my being here puts your ranch at risk, I can leave today." "You're not leaving," Nathan said. "Nathan. You're not leaving," he said again, and there was something in his voice that closed the subject. Not anger. Something quieter than anger, and considerably more certain. "I told you the day you walked in that gate that the position was open. The position is still open, and I don't respond well to letters from men who buy people." Clara looked at him for a long time. Something moved across her face that he couldn't quite read, complicated and layered, and very, very tired. "He won't stop," she said quietly. "Neither will I," Nathan said. He rode to town that afternoon. Not for supplies. He rode to town to find Judge Raymond Cotter, who held circuit court in Hatchet Creek every 8 weeks and happened to be in residence this week, and who Nathan had known for 14 years and respected for most of them. He found the judge at the Meridian Hotel eating a late lunch and sat down across from him without waiting for an invitation. Cotter looked up. "Nathan Cole." "Raymond." The judge set down his fork and read Nathan's face. He'd been reading faces for 30 years. What he saw in Nathan Cole's face made him wave the waitress away and fold his hands on the table. "Tell me," he said. Nathan told him. He told him about Clara, about Gerald Harrow, about the letter and the language in the letter, about the contractual agreement and what Clara had explained about the debt her father had signed over. He laid it out plainly without editorializing. The way you'd present land survey data. Here are the facts. Here are the coordinates. Here is where the line falls. Cotter listened without interrupting. When Nathan finished, the judge was quiet for a moment. Then, "The father's signature on a marriage arrangement is not legally binding in this territory if the woman in question was not of age and did not co-sign, or if she was of age and did not sign at all." "She did not sign at all," Nathan said. "Then Harrow's case is on shaky ground. Depending on his lawyer, he may know that." Cotter tapped the table. "What he can do is make noise. File a civil harassment claim, involve territorial authorities, put a woman's name in enough official documents that her reputation gets dragged through them." He looked at Nathan steadily. "That's the play. Not the law. The noise." "So what do I do?" "You document," Cotter said. "Everything you know about the situation goes on paper. Dates, facts, her account of events, witnesses, if you have them. You create a record that is on the right side of the law before he creates one that tries to put her on the wrong side." The judge leaned forward slightly. "And you find out if there are other people who know Harrow, who've dealt with him. Because men like that, men who buy debt and then try to collect it in flesh, they rarely do it once." Nathan rode back up the mountain thinking about that last thing. He thought about it through supper, which was quieter than usual. Clara didn't push him to talk. She could read a silence the way she read a horse, knowing when to wait and when to move. It was after supper when they were both on the porch, and she was not playing the guitar tonight, just sitting with her hands in her lap, looking at the dark, that he told her what Cotter had said. She listened carefully. When he was done, she said, "He's right. Gerald Harrow has done this before." "How do you know?" "Because there was a woman before me." Her voice was quiet but steady. Her name was Margaret Ellison. Her father had a land debt to Harrow. She married him. She was 22 years old. Clara looked at her hands. "I met her at a church social 3 months before my father died. She was 24 by then. She looked 40. She paused. "I thought about her every step of those 4 miles in bare feet." Nathan sat with that. "There may be others," he said. "There may be others," she agreed. Silence. "If Harrow is collecting women against their will and using debt as leverage, that's not civil law," Nathan said slowly. "That's something a territorial marshal would be interested in." Clara looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. Something cautious and fragile, and very much wanting to be hope, but not allowing itself to be yet. "That's a long way from here to there," she said. "It is," Nathan said. "But it's a road that goes somewhere. That's more than we had this morning." She looked out at the dark for a long time. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. Like the answer mattered and she wanted the real one. Nathan thought about it. He could have said the practical thing, that she was his hired help, and it was his obligation. He could have said the righteous thing, that no man should be allowed to treat a woman like a debt. Both things were true. But what came out was something else. "When I came home the winter after Owen died," he said slowly, "I sat at that table for 3 days and could not think of a single reason to get up. The ranch, the cattle, the horses, none of it felt like enough of a reason." He looked at the dark. "A man needs more than purpose. He needs someone who makes the table feel like the right size." He stopped. He hadn't said anything close to that out loud in 11 years, and he wasn't certain what had just happened to him. Clara was very still. "Your table felt wrong-sized," she said softly. "For a long time," he said. Another silence, different from the ones before it. "Mine did too," Clara said finally. "Long before my father died, long before Harrow." She looked at her hands. "I think some people go looking for the right table their whole lives." "I think that's true," Nathan said. The dark was full of stars tonight. High country stars, thick and close, in a way that people from the cities never quite believed until they saw it. Nathan looked up at them and felt something he could only call gratitude. Strange thing to feel on a night when trouble was coming. But there it was. Clara picked up the guitar. She played something he didn't recognize. Something quiet, and not quite a hymn, and not quite a lullaby, but something in between, something that seemed to be made for this specific porch, on this specific night, with this specific dark around them. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't need to. On a Sunday morning, 11 days after Elias Bright's visit, and 8 days after the letter from Harrow's lawyer, Dale Prentice, rode up the Cole Ranch Road with 2 men behind him. Nathan was at the paddock gate when they came. He saw them from 200 yards, the same distance from which he'd first seen Clara. He closed the paddock gate, latched it, turned around, and waited, and Prentice pulled up 20 feet away. The 2 men with him hung back slightly, which Nathan read as either politeness or uncertainty. He decided to treat it as politeness. "Prentice," he said. "Cole." Prentice was doing the thing he did, the loud man performing reasonableness thing, where his voice went measured and his expression went careful, and everything about him communicated that he was being very patient with a very difficult situation. "I come out here to have a civil conversation." "Then have one," Nathan said. "There's a man in Denver with a legal matter involving your hired woman." Prentice held up a hand before Nathan could speak. "Now I know what you're going to say, but hear me out. A man like Gerald Harrow, he's got lawyers, and he's got influence, and he's connected to half the land office in Colorado Springs. You and me have been neighbors a long time." "We've been in proximity a long time," Nathan said. "It's not the same thing." A slight reddening. "I'm trying to help you." "You're trying to manage me," Nathan said pleasantly. There's a difference. Harrow's people came to see me, Prentice said, and his voice dropped some of the patience it had been performing. They made certain suggestions about how things could go, for ranches in this valley, about water rights, about the road to the railhead. He let that sit for a moment. You understand what I'm saying? Nathan understood exactly what he was saying. He was saying that Gerald Harrow was threatening the water rights and road access that every ranch in the Hatchet Creek Valley depended on, and that he was doing it through Dale Prentice, because Prentice was the kind of man who could be made to carry someone else's threats if you made it worth his while or frightened him enough. I understand, Nathan said. Then you understand I'm not the one making this hard, Prentice said. The woman can go back to Denver. The whole thing goes quiet. Nobody's valley gets turned upside down over one woman's choices. He almost said one woman's foolishness. Nathan could see him deciding not to. You rode up here on a Sunday morning, Nathan said quietly, to ask me to hand a woman over to a man who bought her like property, and you're calling that a civil conversation. I'm calling it, I heard you, Nathan said. Now hear me. Clara Whitmore is my hired help. She earns her wages. She does her work. She is on this ranch lawfully and willingly, and she will stay here for as long as she chooses to. He looked at Prentice steadily. Gerald Harrow has no legal standing in this territory to compel her return. If he believes otherwise, he can take it to a circuit judge and find out how wrong he is. He paused. You can tell him that, with my compliments. Prentice stared at him. Cole, he said with the last of the patience worn off now, you're going to make enemies. Harrow made that decision, Nathan said. Not me. He turned and walked back toward the barn. He didn't look back. He listened instead, and after a long moment, he heard the horses turn and start back down the road. He let out a breath. He stood in the barn doorway and leaned against the frame and let the adrenaline work its way through him. He was not a man who liked conflict. He'd spent 11 years building a life specifically designed to minimize it. He liked quiet, he liked routine, he liked the clean simplicity of work and weather and animals who said what they meant. But he'd meant every word he'd said, every single word. Nathan. He turned. Clara was standing inside the barn. She'd been here the whole time. She'd heard everything. Her face was doing that complicated thing again, all those layers he was slowly learning to read. The fear she didn't let herself show, the anger she kept controlled, and underneath both of them, something else, something that looked at him the way you look at something you're afraid to count on but are counting on anyway. He'll come himself next time, she said. I know, Nathan said. He won't send Prentice. He'll come with lawyers and he'll come with papers and he'll make it... She stopped. He'll make it very difficult. I know, Nathan said again. And you're still... Clara. He said it simply. I meant what I told Prentice, every word of it. He met her eyes. Now I need you to trust that and let me work on the next part. Can you do that? She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, I've never trusted anyone enough to let them work on my behalf. I know, he said. Try it anyway. A pause that stretched long enough to become something to take on weight and meaning. All right, she said. And that those two words said that way by a woman who had walked 4 miles with no shoes and had never in her adult life been in a position to say them and mean them, hit Nathan Cole somewhere in the chest like a fist, except it didn't hurt. It felt like the opposite of hurting. He straightened up off the barn door and said, Good. Then let's get the afternoon work done. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. And he walked back into the sun. Gerald Harrow arrived on a Thursday. Nathan knew he was coming before he got there. Word traveled fast in a valley this small, faster than horses sometimes carried on the invisible current of people who watched roads and noticed strangers and couldn't help themselves. It was young Thomas Caldwell, the storekeeper's boy, who rode up the ranch road at a near gallop on Wednesday evening, with the news a man had checked into the Meridian Hotel in Hatchet Creek, arriving by private coach with 2 other men and a leather satchel that bulged with papers. He'd asked for the best room. He'd paid in advance. He'd told the hotel clerk that he expected to conclude his business in the area within 48 hours. Nathan thanked the boy, sent him home with a coin, and stood in the yard for a while. Then he went inside and told Clara. She was sitting at the kitchen table with the account ledger open, a pencil in her hand, and she set the pencil down very carefully when he told her. He watched her do the thing he'd come to recognize: the internal marshalling, the drawing in, the way she gathered herself, the way a person gathers a coat around them before walking into cold wind. It took about 3 seconds. Then she was composed, and her hands were flat on the table, and she said, "All right." "All right meaning what?" Nathan asked. "All right meaning I heard you," she said. "And all right meaning I'm not running." He looked at her. "I've been thinking," she said. "Since Prentice came, since before that even." She met his eyes. "You told me to trust you to work on the next part. I did. I want to know what the next part is." Nathan sat down. He told her what he and Judge Cotter had discussed: the documentation, the written account of events, the need for witnesses. He told her about what Cotter had said about men like Harrow rarely doing something like this, only once. He told her that he'd sent a letter to the Territorial Marshal's office in Denver 3 days ago with the information Clara had given him about Margaret Ellison. Clara went very still when he said that. "You sent a letter to the Marshal," she said. "I did. Without telling me." "I was going to tell you tonight," Nathan said. "Harrow arriving tomorrow moved the timeline." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully read, something between startled and something that might have been moved if she'd allowed herself to be moved. "What did you say in the letter?" she asked. "The truth," Nathan said. "What you told me about the debt arrangement. What you knew about Margaret Ellison. The fact that a woman was coerced into a contractual marriage agreement she never signed, using her father's debt as leverage." He paused. "I signed my name to it. My full name and my ranch." Something flickered across her face. "That puts you on record." "That's the point," Nathan said. "A man who puts his name on something has something to defend. It's harder to dismiss." Clara was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful, but something underneath it was not careful at all. "Nathan, what you've done, the letter, the judge standing down Prentice, you understand what Harrow will do when he hears all of it." "He'll come at me directly," Nathan said. "Yes." "Good," Nathan said. "Then he stops coming at you sideways." She stared at him. He said it simply, the way he said most things, without decoration, and she heard exactly what he meant by it, that he had positioned himself deliberately between her and the incoming storm, not because she couldn't handle it, but because he had ground to stand on, and he intended to stand on it. Clara looked down at the ledger, looked up again. "I want to be in the room when he comes," she said. "I expected you would," Nathan said. "I mean it. I want to face him, not hide in my room while you handle him. He needs to hear from me directly." Her voice was level, but underneath it was something iron and old. "I have been managed and decided for my entire life. I will not be managed in this." "I know," Nathan said. "You'll be in the room." She held his gaze for one more second, checking. Then she nodded once and picked her pencil back up. He went back outside to finish the evening chores. He worked with his hands the way he always did when his head was too full. Methodical, physical. The repetition of familiar tasks clearing the noise. He fed the horses. He checked the water. He walked the fence line closest to the barn, even though he'd walked it 2 days ago. He was afraid. He recognized it without drama. The way you recognize weather. This is what fear feels like. This is its weight and its particular texture. He was afraid for the ranch, and afraid for Clara, and afraid that when Harrow arrived with his leather satchel full of papers and his 2-day certainty about resolution, Nathan would discover the limits of what a man with a cattle operation and a circuit judge's phone number could actually do against a man with money and lawyers, and the practiced patience of someone who always got what he wanted. He was afraid, and he was not moving. He decided, standing at the fence in the dark with the stars out overhead, that the two things could coexist. That fear did not have to mean retreat. That in fact, this was exactly the kind of moment his father had meant all those years ago, riding up into the Rockies with nothing, and calling it the best summer of his life. The fear was just proof that something mattered. Clara mattered. He let himself know that clearly and without qualification, standing alone in the dark. Then he went to bed. Harrow arrived at 11 in the morning. He was not what Nathan had pictured. He was perhaps 50, not soft, not weak, but the kind of man whose hardness had been cultivated indoors behind desks and across conference tables in courtrooms and boardrooms, where he set the terms and other people adjusted to them. He was well dressed in the way that communicated wealth without trying to communicate wealth, which was the most expensive kind. His hair was dark and going to silver, and he wore it combed back with precision. He had the face of a man who was accustomed to patience and accustomed to winning and regarded these as the same skill. He rode up the Cole Ranch Road in a carriage, not a coach, a proper carriage, which meant he'd had it brought from somewhere because no livery in Hatchet Creek kept carriages. Behind him came two men on horseback. One of them carried the leather satchel. Nathan was standing in the yard when they arrived. He had not dressed up or down. He was in his working clothes because it was a working day, and he stood with his hands easy at his sides and watched the carriage stop. Harrow got out. He looked at Nathan. He looked at the ranch, the cabin, the barn, the paddocks, the horses. He looked at it all with the quiet, assessing gaze of a man who was calculating value, and Nathan found himself wanting to put his body between Harrow's eyes and everything he'd built. "Mr. Cole," Harrow said. His voice was pleasant, deeply, expensively pleasant. "Mr. Harrow," Nathan said. "Thank you for receiving me." "I don't recall inviting you," Nathan said. "But here you are. What do you want?" A slight pause. The pleasantness adjusted, not disappearing, just recalibrating to accommodate a man who wasn't going to perform courtesy back at him. "I want Clara," Harrow said, simply, like she was a parcel he'd left somewhere and had come to retrieve. "Miss Whitmore is my hired help," Nathan said. "She's on this property by her own choice, doing work she was hired to do, earning wages that she is bound by a legal agreement," Harrow said, still pleasant, still patient. "An agreement her father entered into on her behalf, which carries full legal weight in Denver and in the territory of Colorado. I have the documentation here." He looked at the man with the satchel who moved forward. "Keep it where it is," Nathan said. The man stopped. "I've spoken with Judge Raymond Cotter," Nathan said. "I expect you know that given how thoroughly your lawyers seem to be tracking my movements. Cotter says your documentation, whatever it is, has no standing in this territory without the signature of the individual party. Clara Whitmore did not sign anything." For the first time, something moved behind Harrow's eyes. Not anger, something colder than anger. "Her father is dead," Nathan said, "and cannot be held to arrangements made on behalf of a living adult woman who never agreed to them." He kept his voice level. "You know this. Your lawyer knows this. Which means you didn't come here with legal remedies, Mr. Harrow. You came here with the appearance of legal remedies, hoping I wouldn't know the difference." Silence. One of the horses shifted. The leather of the carriage creaked. Harrow looked at Nathan for a long moment with those patient, calculating eyes. "You are making a significant mistake," he said, quietly. "I've been told that before," Nathan said, "by quieter men." And then the cabin door opened, and Clara walked out. She walked out the way she did, everything straight-backed, deliberate, with her chin up and those gray eyes forward. She was wearing her blue dress, the one she'd arrived in now, clean and mended. She was wearing the shoes Nathan had made. She stopped beside Nathan, and she looked at Gerald Harrow, and she did not look afraid. Nathan felt something move through him when she came to stand beside him. Something that had nothing to do with strategy or legal standing. Something older than either of those things. Harrow looked at her. Something happened in his face when he saw her. Something that he managed almost immediately, but not quite fast enough. Surprise first. And then something Nathan recognized as the expression of a man who has told himself a story about a situation and has just encountered evidence that the story was wrong. "Clara," Harrow said. "Mr. Harrow," Clara said. "You look well," he said. "I am well," she said. "I work here. I earn wages. I am on this property by my own choosing." She said it almost word for word what Nathan had said, and the echo of it was deliberate. "I am not returning to Denver." "We had an agreement," Harrow said. "My father had an agreement," Clara said. "I am not my father. I am not a piece of property that agreement transferred with the debt." Her voice didn't shake. Nathan had not expected it to. "Whatever you think you're owed, Mr. Harrow, you are not owed me." Harrow shifted his weight slightly. He looked from Clara to Nathan and back to Clara, and Nathan could see him recalculating, not retreating, not even close to retreating, but recalculating. Finding new angles. "I invested significantly," Harrow said, and now the pleasantness was mostly gone, replaced by something more honest and considerably less comfortable. "In your father's business, on the understanding that the arrangement would be honored. That is not sentiment, Miss Whitmore. That is contract." "Then sue my father's estate," Clara said. "What's left of it?" "There is nothing left of it," Harrow said. "I know," Clara said. "That's why you're here instead of in a courtroom." She held his eyes. "There is nothing legal to pursue. There is only intimidation, and I am done being intimidated." A long silence. Harrow turned back to Nathan. "You've put ideas in her head," he said. "She came with her own ideas," Nathan said. "I just gave her somewhere to stand." "This isn't finished," Harrow said. It was not a shout. It was worse than a shout. It was a statement of intent quietly delivered by a man who had the resources to back it up. "No," Nathan agreed. "It isn't. But here's what is finished. You are finished today on this property. You came here and you presented your position and you heard our answer. You are welcome to take your lawyers and your papers and your carriage back to wherever you came from and decide what you want to do next." He took one step forward. One. "But you will not frighten this woman on my land again." Harrow looked at him. Nathan looked back. Harrow got back in the carriage. Ugh. They watched the carriage go down the road until it was out of sight. Neither of them moved until it was gone. Then Clara let out a breath that had been held so long it came out shaking slightly at the edges. Just slightly. Just enough that Nathan heard it. "He'll find another way," she said. "I know," Nathan said. "What he said about not being finished, he means it. He has lawyers in Colorado Springs who can file motions, create delays, put enough paperwork in front of enough clerks that it becomes—" She stopped. "That it becomes something." "I wrote to the marshal," Nathan said. "I know, but that takes time." "Then we use the time we have." She looked at him. "To do what?" "To build a case that's stronger than his." He turned to face her. "You said there was a woman, Margaret Ellison. Do you know where she is now?" Something changed in Clara's face. Careful hope, the fragile kind. "I know her sister," she said. "Ruth Ellison. She moved to Pueblo after Margaret." She paused. "After Margaret's situation became what it became." "Write to her," Nathan said. "She may not want to be involved. She may not," he agreed. "But she may. People who've watched someone they love be broken, sometimes they want a chance to say so on the record." He met her eyes. "It's worth asking." Clara nodded slowly. "And what do we do in the meantime?" she asked. "We work," Nathan said. "We do what we've been doing. We don't give Harrow anything to point to that makes this look like anything other than what it is: a woman doing lawful work, a man running a lawful ranch, and a man from Denver with no legal standing and too much money trying to make trouble." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You make it sound straightforward." "It isn't," he said. "But it looks straightforward. And with Harrow, how it looks matters." She studied him. "You've thought a great deal about this." "I've had a few nights," he said. And there it was, that thing that moved across her face sometimes that complicated light like sun through water. She looked at him the way she had looked at Duchess that first morning, with patience and recognition, and something she hadn't decided yet what to call. "Nathan," she said. "Clara, thank you." She said it differently than she had before. Not the thank you of a woman receiving shoes or a meal or a latched door. This one went further. This one had weight and history and something like permanence to it. He held it. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We haven't won anything." "I know," she said. "I'm thanking you for the fight." 2 days after Harrow's visit, the town turned. Not all of it. Not the good people. And there were good people in Hatchet Creek Caldwell, and his wife, the Beaumont family, who ran the mill. Elias Bright, who had no permanent residence, but whose opinion still carried weight. But enough of it. Enough people who'd heard Prentice's version of events, or Harrow's man, who'd been quietly buying drinks at the saloon and planting questions, or who'd simply decided that a woman with no shoes and no past and no name in the valley was trouble on two legs. It was Myra Alderson who said it to Nathan's face. She was a widow, 60 years old, sharp-tongued and sharp-eyed, and not unkind in the ordinary run of things. But she had opinions, and she did not keep them private. She stopped Nathan outside Caldwell's on Saturday morning and said without preamble, "Nathan Cole, you are going to lose this ranch over a woman you knew for 3 months." "Good morning to you too, Myra," Nathan said. "I mean it," she said. "Harrow's man was in the saloon Thursday night. He told people about the debt, about her father. He told people she ran from a legal arrangement." She crossed her arms. "Half the valley thinks she's a criminal and you're a fool." "I've been called worse by better people," Nathan said. "Nathan!" Her voice dropped, and for a moment the sharpness went out of it, and something genuinely worried came in. "I knew your father. I knew Owen. I don't want to see what they built go to pieces because you took in a stray." Nathan looked at her for a moment. "Clara Whitmore is not a stray," he said quietly. "She is a woman who walked 4 miles on a rocky road to ask for honest work. She does that work every day. She earns her wages. She has more character in one conversation than most people have in a year." He held Myra's eyes. "And if taking her side is what costs me this ranch, then the ranch was worth less than I thought." Myra stared at him. "You're in love with her," she said, flat, certain. Nathan opened his mouth, closed it, because the thing was that he had not said that to himself yet. He had thought she matters. He had thought I will not back down. He had thought her laugh is the best thing I've heard in 11 years. But he had not said the word, not even internally, not even in the dark on the porch under the stars. And here was Myra Alderson, 60 years old, and twice widowed, saying it to his face on a Saturday morning outside Caldwell's general store. "I don't," he started. "You are," Myra said, not unkindly. "Lord help you, Nathan, you are absolutely gone on that woman." She looked at him for a moment with something that was incredibly almost fond. "Well, then you'd better win." She went into the store. Nathan stood outside for a long minute. Then he untied Ranger and rode home. He did not say anything to Clara about what Myra had said. He came home, and he worked, and he ate supper, and he sat on the porch and let the evening go quiet around him, and he thought about what it meant, what it really meant, that the word had been said out loud by someone other than himself. As if once it existed in the air between two people, it couldn't be taken back, even if one of those people was 60 years old and not involved in the situation at all. He thought about what it cost him to know it, and what it would cost him to act on it. He was still thinking about it when Copper started screaming. The sound hit him before he understood what it was. A horse in full panic. Not a whinny, not a protest, but the deep rolling sound of a large animal that believed it was dying. Nathan was off the porch and running before he'd made a conscious decision to move, and Clara was right behind him. He could hear her footsteps, and they reached the barn at the same moment, and the smell hit them both, smoke. Not from inside the barn, from the direction of the south fence line. A quarter-mile away, something was burning. Nathan's first move was the horses. He went straight to the stalls. Copper first, because Copper was already half mad with fear, throwing himself against the gate, and he got the gate open, and got a hand on the lead, and talked the horse down, with the same low, steady voice he'd learned partly from watching Clara. Behind him, Clara was already at Duchess's stall, the old mare trembling under her hands, and she was talking the wordless lullaby sound, and Duchess was listening even now. They got the horses out into the north paddock, all 14 of them, within 10 minutes. Nathan's hands were shaking slightly, and he didn't have time to notice. He stood at the fence and looked south and saw the orange glow of it. "The haystacks," he said. "How many?" Clara said. "Looks like the south too." He watched the glow. "Could have been lightning. There were clouds earlier." "There was no lightning," Clara said quietly. He looked at her. She was looking at the fire with an expression that was not panic, not hysteria, but a cold, particular fury that he had not seen on her face before. "No," he said. "There wasn't." Silence. "He did this," she said. "I can't prove that." "Nathan." She turned to look at him, and the fury was very controlled, very deliberate, like something behind glass. "He did this." Nathan looked back at the fire, and looked. 2 haystacks. Not the barn, not the cabin, not the animals. The haystacks. Enough to send a message. Enough to cost him something real weeks of winter feed money he didn't have to easily replace, without doing the kind of damage that would bring a territorial marshal running immediately. Calculated. Precise. The kind of damage a man does when he wants you to know you're bleeding, but can't prove who cut you. "Go inside," Nathan said. "I'm not Clara." He said it without turning from the fire. "Please go inside and latch the door and stay there until I come back." A pause. He could feel her making the decision, pushing against the request, wanting to stay, wanting to be useful. And then accepting it not because he'd told her to, but because she understood what he was asking and why. "Be careful," she said. He heard her go. He rode south and confirmed what he already knew. The fire had started at a single point and spread deliberately. Someone had been on his land in the dark and done this and then ridden away, and he would not be able to prove who. He put the fire out as much as he could. He saved what he could save. He rode back in the small hours of the morning with soot on his hands and a cold, clear understanding settling into his chest. Harrow was done with messages. This was escalation.
Jumped up.
Judge Cotter came out the following morning uninvited because word had gotten to him overnight. He stood at the edge of the burn site and looked at it with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set. "I've seen this before," he said. "I expect you have," Nathan said. "It's a problem," Cotter said, "because the man who did this knew exactly what he was doing. It's not arson that brings a federal marshal. It's property destruction and the burden of proof for identifying the party." "I know what the burden of proof is," Nathan said. Cotter looked at him. "You need something more." "I know that too." "Nathan." The judge turned to face him. "I've been in contact with the Territorial Marshal's office in response to your letter. They're aware of the Harrow situation. They have been actually for some time. There are other complaints. Yours was not the first letter with Gerald Harrow's name in it." Nathan went still. "How many?" he said. "At least 4 them the Marshal's office has documented," Cotter said. "Debt leverage, contractual coercion, women bound to arrangements they never agreed to. He's careful about it always with a father's signature, always with a death between the agreement and the enforcement. He finds men in debt who have daughters, and he waits." Nathan looked at the burned haystacks. "They've been building a case," Cotter said. "Your letter and what you included about Margaret Ellison was actually significant. Because Ellison's wife has been unwilling to speak to authorities directly, but if another woman can corroborate her experience, Clara will corroborate it," Nathan said immediately. "I know she will," Cotter said. "But I need her in Colorado Springs. I need her to give a sworn statement to the Marshal's office. Not a letter, a statement in person on the record." He held Nathan's eyes. "And I need her to go before Harrow hears about the investigation, because if he hears first, he will move. He will file something in Denver that ties her up in civil court for 2 years, and even if he loses eventually, the noise of it will—" "When?" Nathan said. "As soon as possible," Cotter said. Nathan looked at the burned ground. "How many days' ride?" 3 days to Colorado Springs," Cotter said. 3 days back. A day or two for the statement." 8 days, Nathan said. 8 days, Cotter confirmed. Nathan turned toward the cabin. "I'll tell her now," he said. She was ready before he'd finished explaining. That was the thing about Clara Whitmore. She didn't require convincing toward the right action. She required accurate information, and then she moved. She was already at the back room door, thinking about what to pack the wooden box. Her papers, the account of Margaret Ellison, she'd been quietly writing down since Nathan asked her to before Nathan got to the end of what Cotter had told him. "Other women," she said when he mentioned the other complaints. "At least 4 documented," Nathan said. Something moved through her face. Complex, grief and anger, and something that looked like responsibility. "They've been carrying this alone," she said. "They have. And if you go and give your statement, it becomes part of an active federal investigation," Nathan said. "Not just your word against his money. A pattern of behavior documented with multiple victims on the record." He held her eyes. "It changes the shape of the whole thing." Clara stood with that for a moment. "What about the ranch?" she asked. "If we're both gone, Cal Henderson will come and watch the stock," Nathan said. Cal was his nearest neighbor to the north, a weathered, dependable man of 50 who'd helped Nathan through 2 bad winters and asked nothing in return but the same. "I trust him. And if Harrow does something while we're away, then Cotter has it documented that we left for Colorado Springs to cooperate with a federal investigation," Nathan said, "which means anything Harrow does while we're gone goes on a list that already has his name at the top." Clara nodded slowly. Then she looked at him directly the way she did when she wanted to make sure she was being understood. "Nathan," she said, "when we get to Colorado Springs, when I give this statement." She paused. "Are you going to tell them everything about the ranch, the letter Prentice, the fire?" "Every word of it," Nathan said. "Even if it puts you in a position you don't want to be in legally. Even if it—" "Clara." He said her name the way he said it sometimes, not as a stop, but as a signal. "I'm here. I'm listening. I mean what I say. I'm not interested in protecting myself from telling the truth." She held his gaze. "We leave tomorrow morning," he said. "Pack what you need." She turned back toward the room, stopped. Without turning around, she said, "I'm glad I walked 4 miles." He didn't answer right away. He stood in the doorway with those words settling into him, into the place that had been quiet for 11 years, and was quiet no longer. "So am I," he said. She went into her room. He stood where he was for a moment longer in the space where she'd been standing, and let himself know fully and without qualification. The way he'd let himself know things, beside fence posts and under stars. That whatever happened in Colorado Springs, whatever Harrow filed or threatened or burned, there was no version of what came next in which he was willing to let her go. Not because she needed him, but because he needed her, and he was done pretending otherwise. They left before sunrise. Nathan had the horses ready in the dark, both of them saddled and packed with what they needed for 8 days: bedrolls, food, water, the wooden box Clara carried herself and would not let him take. Cal Henderson had come over the evening before, quiet and dependable as always, and walked the property with Nathan while Clara made supper, and Nathan had told him everything. Not the abbreviated version, not the polite version. Everything. Cal had listened with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and when Nathan finished, Cal said, "You go. I'll be here when you get back." That was all. Nathan had shaken his hand, and that had been enough. Clara came out of the cabin in the pre-dawn dark with the wooden box under one arm and her coat over the other, and she stopped when she saw both horses ready and looked at Nathan with an expression that he was getting better at reading. "You saddled Bella for me," she said. Bella was the best of his quarter horses, not the most showy. Ranger was the most showy, but the most steady, the most sure-footed, the most reliable over long mountain terrain. He'd thought about which horse for a long time standing in the barn, and he'd come back to Bella every time. "She's the right horse for the road," Nathan said. Clara looked at Bella for a moment. Then she put her foot in the stirrup and swung up with the ease of someone who had been riding most of her life, and she adjusted her seat and said, "Let's go." They rode south out of the high country, as the sky went from black to deep blue, to the first thin gray of morning at the edges, and the mountains rose on either side of them, enormous and indifferent, and somehow comforting in their permanence. Nathan rode slightly ahead, because he knew the trail, and Clara rode a length behind him, and they didn't talk for the first hour, which suited them both. It was the kind of silence that had become something else entirely over the past 2 months. Not the absence of conversation, but the presence of comfort. Two people who had learned each other well enough to sit in the same quiet without it being empty. Clara broke it first as they dropped off the high trail onto the lower road. "Tell me about Colorado Springs," she said. "Growing city," Nathan said. "Bigger than Hatchet Creek by a considerable measure. The marshal's office is on Cascade Avenue. Cotter rode ahead, they'll be expecting us." He paused. "The man you'll be speaking with is Deputy Marshal John Hare. Cotter says he's thorough, that he listens." "Does he believe women?" Clara asked. The directness of it hit him the way her directness always did a clean, flat question that required a clean, flat answer. "Cotter says he does," Nathan said. "And Cotter doesn't say things he doesn't mean." "All right," Clara said. A pause. "Are you frightened?" Nathan asked. She thought about it for a moment, which was what he'd come to appreciate about her. She thought about things before she answered them. "Not of the marshal," she said. "Of what Harrow might do while we're on the road. Of what he might file in Denver while we're moving and can't respond." She paused. "Of whether Margaret Ellison's sister will agree to speak. And if she doesn't." "Then it's my word against his documentation," Clara said. "And he has very good documentation. It's wrong, but it looks right on paper, which is almost the same thing in a courthouse." Nathan was quiet. "It won't be just your word," he said. "I'll give a statement too." She looked at him. He felt her eyes from a length back. "Nathan? You weren't there," she said. "You can't." "I can speak to the letter from his lawyer," Nathan said. "I can speak to Prentice's visit. I can speak to what happened to my haystacks. I can speak to the pattern of behavior I observed as a direct party to this situation." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "That's not hearsay. That's testimony." Silence. "You've been thinking about this a great deal," she said. "I've had 3 days to think about it," he said. "I'm a slow thinker, but I'm thorough." He heard her not quite a laugh, but close. "You're not slow," she said. "You're deliberate. There's a difference." He glanced back at her. "You sound like my father," he said. "What was he like?" The question caught him slightly off guard, the way personal questions did not unwelcomely just with a small adjustment needed. "Stubborn," Nathan said. "Funny in a way he didn't realize. He'd say something completely dry and then look surprised when people laughed." He paused. "He believed in land. He thought if a man worked a piece of land long enough it became part of him. That you couldn't really separate them." "Do you believe that?" Nathan thought about it. "I used to think it was about the land," he said slowly. "Now I think he meant something else. I think he meant when you put enough of yourself into something, it changes you. The land did that to him, and to Owen." He was quiet for a moment. "I think that's true for more than just land." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. He felt her receiving it the way she received things carefully, completely, without rushing past it. They rode on in the morning that was coming up gold and wide. Empty. They stopped at midday at a creek crossing. Nathan knew where the water ran cold and clear out of the rock face, and the horses could rest and drink. He'd packed food, bread, dried beef, and apple apiece, and they sat on opposite sides of a fallen log and ate in the easy quiet they'd gotten used to, the one that felt more like companionship than any conversation he could remember from the last decade. Clara was reading the account she'd written, the one about Margaret Ellison. She read it with a pencil in her hand, making small notations in the margins, and Nathan watched her, without watching her, that peripheral attention he'd developed. "You're changing things," he said. "Adding things," she said. I remembered something this morning. Margaret told me once at that church social, the one I mentioned, she said that when she signed the marriage documents, a man from Harrow's office was in the room. She thought it was standard. She said Harrow introduced him as a notary. She looked up. But she said afterward that the man never showed her his credentials. She just assumed. Nathan went still. "A fraudulent notary," he said. "Possibly," Clara said. "If the documentation was notarized improperly." "Then the contract itself may be invalid," Nathan said. "Not just unenforceable against you specifically, but fraudulent on its face." She looked at him steadily. "That changes things." "That changes everything," Nathan said. She wrote something in the margin. Her hand was steady, and her expression was focused, and Nathan watched her work with the pencil the same way she worked a lead rope, sure and precise and completely committed. "Clara," he said. She looked up. "When this is over—" He stopped. She waited. "When this is resolved," he said more carefully, "I want to talk to you about something, about what comes next." She studied him, that gray gaze level and patient. "All right," she said. "Not now," he said. "When this is done." "All right," she said again. She looked back at her notes. But something in her posture had changed, a very slight softening, a small warmth entering the line of her shoulders, and he saw it. He looked at the creek and let himself be glad. They were 6 miles outside of Hatchet Creek on the second morning when they found the rider. He came up behind them at a canter, and Nathan heard him early and turned Ranger to face him before he was close enough to be a problem. One man. Young mid-20s maybe. Well-dressed in a way that was not the local way, that was the city way, the Denver way. He pulled up 20 feet back and held his hands slightly open, which was the universal signal for "I am not drawing a weapon right now," and which Nathan appreciated while simultaneously noting that the signal needed to exist meant there was a weapon. "Mr. Cole," the man said, "my name is Robert Vance. I work for Mr. Gerald Harrow." "I know who you work for," Nathan said. Clara had pulled Bella up beside Ranger. Nathan felt her there without looking, steady, not retreating. "Mr. Harrow is aware that you are traveling to Colorado Springs," Vance said. He said it carefully, like he'd practiced the phrasing. "He wanted me to convey a message before you arrived." "Convey it," Nathan said. "Mr. Harrow is willing to release all claims in this matter in exchange for a private settlement," Vance said. "No court involvement, no marshal, no public record. A sum to be agreed upon paid from your cattle operation, and the matter is closed entirely." Silence. Nathan heard what that meant. Harrow knew about the investigation. Harrow knew there were other women on record. Harrow knew that if Clara's statement joined theirs, the pattern became undeniable, and undeniable patterns were what federal marshals built cases on. He was scared. Gerald Harrow, with his lawyers and his carriage and his $400 debt collections, was scared. Nathan looked at Vance. "Tell Mr. Harrow," he said, "that we don't settle." Vance blinked. "Sir, the sum he's prepared to offer—" "I don't care about the sum," Nathan said. "Tell him we don't settle." Vance looked at Clara. Clara looked back at him with the expression of a woman who had walked 4 miles with no shoes and had nothing left to be afraid of. "Tell him," she said quietly, "that the marshal's office will be receiving our statements as scheduled." Vance held their gaze for a moment. Then he turned his horse and rode back the way he'd come. Clara watched him go. "He's going to try something else," she said. "He's going to try to get there before us." Nathan said, "File something in Denver, get a judge there to issue a hold. Slow us down." He looked at her. "We need to move faster." "Then let's move faster," she said. They pushed the horses that afternoon harder than Nathan liked to push them. But Bella was steady, and Ranger was inexhaustible, and by the time they stopped for the night, they'd gained 2 hours. Nathan made a fire, and Clara made coffee from the tin she'd packed, and they sat across it, and Nathan said, "We'll be there by tomorrow midday if we start at dawn." And if Harrow files something in Denver overnight? Cotter anticipated that, Nathan said. He wrote to a colleague in Denver, a judge who knows Harrow's history, not a friend of Harrow's, which in Denver is not a small thing. He looked at the fire. Harrow has friends in Colorado, but he also has a reputation, and reputations are two-edged. Clara held her coffee cup and was quiet for a moment. Then, Nathan, what happens if we get there and the marshal says it's not enough, that my statement and yours and whatever Ruth Ellison provides, that it still doesn't meet the threshold for a federal case? He looked up at her across the fire. Then we go home, he said. And we fight him in territorial court with what we have. It'll be slower and uglier, but we fight him there. And if the territorial court sides with him, then we appeal, Nathan said. And we find the next judge, and the next. He held her eyes across the fire. Clara, I'm not running out of fight. I want you to understand that. Whatever room this ends up in, I will be in that room. She looked at him for a long time. Why? She said. And this time, it wasn't the question she'd asked on the porch, the tired, wondering kind. This time, it was something more demanding, more direct. Tell me the real reason, Nathan. Not the righteous one, not the legal one, the real one. He set his coffee down. He looked at her across the fire. And he said the thing he'd been carrying since Myra Alderson said the word outside Caldwell's store on a Saturday morning, and he hadn't been able to put it back in the box since. Because I love you, he said. That's the reason. That's the whole reason. The fire cracked. Clara did not move. She sat with what he'd said, and he sat with having said it, and neither of them rushed. Then Clara said very quietly, I know. You know, he repeated. I've known for a while, she said. I didn't say anything because... She stopped. Because I wasn't sure I deserved it yet, or that I'd earned the right to receive it. He stared at her. That's not how it works, he said. I know that now, she said. I'm learning that now. She looked at him across the fire with those gray eyes that saw too much. I'm not ready to say everything yet. I want you to know that's not because the answer is no. It's because I need to say it when I mean all of it, not just most of it. He was quiet for a moment. That's the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me, he said. I'm trying to be honest with you, she said. I'm trying to be something I haven't always been allowed to be. He nodded, once slow. Take the time you need, he said. She looked at the fire. Thank you, she said, for saying it first. He almost smiled. Seemed like something that needed doing. And there it was, her laugh, the real one. The one she didn't stop herself from having startled out of her the same way it had been that first time with the fence post joke, and this time he didn't look away. He let himself see it fully, and he held it carefully in the part of him that had been empty for 11 years. They sat by the fire until it burned down. Colorado Springs was everything Nathan had said, larger, louder, more compressed than Hatchet Creek, by a factor that Clara felt in her chest when they rode in the following noon. People everywhere, horses and wagons, and the particular noise of a city that had decided to be a city and was committed to the bit. The marshal's office on Cascade Avenue was a brick building, modest and clean, with a hand-lettered sign that said, Territorial Marshal Colorado Springs District. Nathan tied the horses at the post out front and looked at Clara. Ready, he said. Yes, she said, and meant it. Deputy Marshal John Hare was a man of 45, with a lean, watchful face and brown eyes that did what Cotter had said they would do. They listened. He stood when they came in and shook Nathan's hand, and then turned to Clara and said, Miss Whitmore, I'm glad you came. Not we've been waiting, or about time, or any of the other things a person with authority over the situation could have said. Just, I'm glad you came. Like she'd done something. Like the coming itself was a choice that mattered. Clara sat down across from him and put the wooden box on the desk between them. Everything I have is in here, she said. My father's letters, the correspondence from Harrow's lawyer, the account I've written of what I know about Margaret Ellison. She opened the lid. "Where would you like to start?" Hare looked at the contents of the box. Then he looked at Clara with the expression of a man who had spent years waiting for the right person to walk through the right door. "From the beginning, Miss Whitmore," he said. "Take all the time you need." She talked for 4 hours. Nathan sat in the outer office and waited. He could hear her voice through the wall, not the words, just the voice, steady and clear with the cadences. He knew, the slight pause before a difficult truth, the leveling out, when emotion threatened to rise, the quiet precision of a woman who had thought this through and knew what she needed to say. He drank the coffee and Deputy brought him. He stared at the wall. He thought about the ranch and Cal Henderson, and the 14 horses, and the quarter horses he was supposed to be prepping for September sale. He thought about what Clara had said. "I need to say it when I mean all of it. Not just most of it." He could wait for all of it. He was a patient man. He could wait. At the 3-hour mark, a woman arrived. She came through the front door of the marshal's office with the purposeful stride of someone who had made a decision and made it quickly before they could unmake it. She was perhaps Clara's age, maybe a few years older, with dark hair and tired eyes, and her hands clasped together in front of her in a way that looked like they were holding each other up. She looked at Nathan. "Are you Cole?" she said. "I am," he said. "Ruth Ellison," she said. "Margaret's sister." She looked at the door to Hare's office. "She wrote to me. Miss Whitmore did, 3 weeks ago." She swallowed. "I got the letter late. I rode from Pueblo." She looked back at Nathan. "Is she in there?" "She is," Nathan said. Ruth Ellison looked at the door for a long moment. "My sister," she said and stopped. Tried again. "My sister is not well. She hasn't been well since the marriage. Harrow's household, it wasn't—" She stopped again, pressing her lips together. "I couldn't get her to speak to anyone. She was too afraid. But if someone else is speaking—" "Someone else is speaking," Nathan said. Ruth Ellison straightened. "Then so am I," she said. They came out together, Clara and Deputy Marshal Hare, at the 4-hour mark. Clara's face was composed, but there was a particular quality to her stillness that Nathan had learned to read as the aftermath of something hard. She saw Ruth Ellison standing in the outer office, and she went very still for one moment, and then she crossed the room and took the woman's hands in both of hers. "You came," Clara said. "You wrote," Ruth said. "No one ever wrote before." Her voice was uneven at the edges. "You wrote to me like it mattered what I had to say." "It matters enormously," Clara said. They looked at each other. These two women, one of whom had run, and one of whom had stayed with a sister who couldn't run, and Nathan sat in the corner of the room and understood that what was happening between them was something that had needed to happen for a long time before he was ever part of the story. Hare looked at Nathan. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I'd like your statement now if you're ready." Nathan stood. "I'm ready," he said. He gave his statement in an hour. He told it straight in order the way a man tells a land survey. "Here is where I was. Here is what I saw. Here are the coordinates of each event. The letter from Harrow's lawyer, Prentice's visit, the fire, the conversation on the road with Robert Vance." He told it without dramatics and without softening, and he put his name on every word of it. When he was done, Hare set down his pen. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I want to tell you something. Gerald Harrow has been a person of interest to this office for 16 months. We have had information and testimony from other parties, but the pattern has been difficult to prosecute because each individual case looks like a civil matter. A debt, an agreement, a family arrangement." He paused. "What you and Miss Whitmore, and now Miss Ruth Ellison, have given us the notary fraud, the pattern of deliberate targeting of indebted fathers with unmarried daughters, the intimidation through property destruction, that is not a civil matter. That is federal." Nathan looked at him. "How long?" he said. "Months," Hare said honestly. "Federal investigations are not fast. Harrow will retain lawyers and fight every step." He met Nathan's eyes. But this is the strongest case we have had. And with what Miss Ellison is prepared to tell us about her sister's documentation. He stopped. We will pursue this. I give you my word. Nathan thought about that. What does Clara do in the meantime? He said. While you're building it. Miss Whitmore is free to live and work wherever she chooses, Hare said. Harrow has no legal standing to compel her anywhere. If he files anything in any court in Denver or Colorado Springs or anywhere in this territory, you will hear from my office before she does. He paused. She is not alone in this anymore. She is not alone in this anymore. Nathan heard that and felt something release in his chest that had been wound tight for weeks. He shook Hare's hand and went out to the front office. Clara was still talking with Ruth Ellison. Quietly, with their heads close together, the way women talk when they are giving each other something that they can't give in the presence of anyone else. Nathan went to the window and looked out at the street and waited. He was good at waiting. She came to him when the conversation was done. She came and stood beside him at the window, and they both looked out at Colorado Springs going about its noisy, committed business. She's going to speak, Clara said. Ruth, she's going to speak for Margaret. I know, Nathan said. I heard. She said nobody ever wrote to her like the testimony would matter. Clara's voice was quiet. She said she'd been carrying it alone for 2 years because nobody ever treated it like a matter of record. She paused. I didn't do anything except write a letter. You did a great deal more than that, Nathan said. She was quiet. Hare told me it will take months, she said. He told me the same. And in the meantime? She glanced at him sideways. In the meantime, you have a job, Nathan said, and a room with a latch, and an old horse named Duchess who would, I believe, have opinions about you leaving. Clara almost smiled. And you, she said. You have opinions too. He looked at her. He thought about what she'd said by the fire. I'm not ready to say everything yet. I need to say it when I mean all of it. He was a patient man. He would wait for all of it. I have opinions, he said. I'll share them when you're ready to hear them. She looked at him for a long moment with those gray eyes that hadn't missed a single thing in 3 months and were not missing anything now. All right, she said. They went to collect the horses. The ride home took 3 days, the same as the ride out, but it was different. Nathan felt the difference in the air between them, something looser, something that had been held tense for months and had finally been given permission to breathe. They talked more on the return trip. Small things, mostly the horses, the ranch, what needed doing when they got back, whether the south fence had been checked in their absence. The kind of conversation that sounds like logistics but isn't. The kind that means I am imagining the future with you in it. On the last night, camped near the creek crossing where they'd eaten apples and bread on the way down, Clara set the wooden box on the log between them and opened it. She took the letters out one by one. The ones from her father's estate, the ones from Harrow's lawyer, the one from her sister telling her to come back. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she put them back, I'm keeping these, she said. As long as the case is active, they're evidence. She closed the lid. But when it's done... She paused. When it's done, I think I'll keep just the one. Which one? Nathan asked. She reached into the box and took out something he hadn't seen before, a small piece of paper folded once at the bottom of the box under everything else. She held it for a moment without unfolding it. It's a letter I wrote to myself, she said, on the night I decided to run, before I left. She looked at it. I wrote down all the reasons I was going, all the things I believed about what I deserved and what I could build, and what kind of life was still possible if I was brave enough to leave. She looked up. I was right about all of it. Nathan looked at her across the fire. You were, he said. She folded the paper again and put it back in the box and closed the lid and set it beside her the way she always did, carefully like something worth keeping. And Nathan Cole sat across the fire from the woman who had appeared at his gate with no shoes and a wooden box, and a request for honest work, And he thought about his father saying, "A man puts enough of himself into something, it changes you." He thought about Owen's guitar on the porch in the evenings. He thought about a mare who hadn't let anyone near her in 2 years, pressing her nose into a woman's shoulder because the woman had known to wait. He thought about 11 years of the wrong-sized table. He put another piece of wood on the fire. 3 more hours to home, he said. I know, she said. They sat in the fire's warmth and the mountains dark, and neither one of them reached for more than what the moment offered, because what the moment offered was already something they had both spent a long time going without. And that was enough. For now, that was more than enough. They rode home in the early morning dark, and Cal Henderson was standing at the gate when they arrived, which told Nathan something had happened before Cal even opened his mouth. Cal was not a man who stood at gates. Cal was a man who worked until the work was done and then found somewhere quiet to sit. Standing at a gate at sunrise meant he'd been watching the road. Nathan pulled Ranger up and looked at him. What happened? Nathan said. Nothing to the animals, Cal said immediately, because he knew that would be the first question. Horses are all fine, cattle's fine, the cabin's fine. Then what? Cal reached into his coat pocket and produced an envelope. Man came yesterday afternoon. Not Prentice. Not one of Harrow's hired hands. A different man, older, official-looking. Left this for Miss Whitmore. He held the envelope out toward Clara. Said it came from a law office in Denver. Said she'd want to read it before anything else happened. Nathan looked at Clara. She took the envelope. She didn't open it immediately. She sat on Bella and held it in both hands and looked at her own name written on the outside in a formal hand she didn't recognize, and Nathan watched her face go through something private and complicated and then settle into the careful composure that was her armor when she needed it. Let me put the horses up first, she said. Clara. The horses first, she said, steady. Then the letter. They put the horses up. Nathan worked beside her without pushing, letting her set the pace, understanding that she needed the 20 minutes of familiar physical work to brace whatever was coming. They moved through the stalls in the practiced rhythm they'd built over months, him on one side, her on the other, each knowing what the other was doing without having to check. When it was done, they went inside. Cal stayed in the yard, which Nathan appreciated. Clara sat at the table where she always sat, and Nathan put coffee on, because it was what he did. And she set the letter on the table in front of her and looked at it, and then she picked it up and opened it. He watched her read it. She read it once. Then she read it again more slowly. He could see her eyes moving across the lines with the careful, methodical attention she brought to the account ledger, to the horse training notes she kept to everything she put her mind to. Then she set it down. He put the coffee in front of her and sat across from her and waited. Harrow has filed in Denver, she said. Through the civil court. He's claiming breach of contractual agreement and seeking a financial judgment against my father's estate. She paused. What's left of it? Meaning he can't compel me anymore, she said. He knows that. Hare's investigation has made that clear, so he's pivoting. She touched the edge of the letter. He's going after the estate instead. The house. What's left of my sister's family situation. She looked up. He can't get me, so he's going after Eleanor. Eleanor, the sister. The one who'd written come back in the letter Clara had read on the porch steps all those weeks ago. Nathan had never heard her name before. It landed now with the particular weight of a person becoming real. Does Eleanor know? He said. This letter is also addressed to her, Clara said. It's a notification of the civil filing. They sent a copy here because... She stopped. Breathed. Because they knew I would want to know. Or because they wanted me to know that no matter what I did, he had another angle. She was very still. He always has another angle. Nathan looked at the letter. He thought about Deputy Marshal Hare saying federal investigations are not fast with the honest face of a man who meant it. He thought about months. He thought about Eleanor in Denver, living in a house that was now a legal target, probably not yet knowing that her sister's choice to run had just arrived on her doorstep in an envelope. You need to write to Eleanor, Nathan said. I know. Today, he said, before she hears about it from Harrow's lawyers first. I know, Clara said again. Her voice was flat, not cold, the flatness of someone managing something in real time, keeping it contained by sheer act of will. Clara. He said her name the way he had learned to say it, not as a stop, not as a redirect. Just, I'm here. This is not your fault. She looked at him. I know whose fault it is, she said. I'm not confused about that. Her jaw tightened slightly. What I'm confused about is how to protect my sister from a man who has made a career of finding the exact point where a woman is most exposed and pressing on it. She looked at the letter. Eleanor didn't run. Eleanor stayed and tried to manage it, and she wrote me that letter because she was frightened, and she thought coming back was the only way to make it stop. Her voice dropped. And now he's going after her anyway. Because he can. Because she's there, and I'm here, and he needs somewhere to push. Nathan looked at her across the table. He made a decision. Write the letter to Eleanor, he said. Tell her what we know. Tell her about Hare, about the investigation about Ruth Ellison. Tell her that Harrow is pivoting because the federal case has him scared, and scared men attack whatever's nearest. He paused. And tell her she's not managing this alone anymore. Clara looked at him. And then, she said. And then I'm going to write to Cotter, Nathan said. Because a civil filing in Denver that targets a woman's family in direct response to her cooperation with a federal investigation, that's not civil law anymore. That's intimidation of a witness. He held her eyes. Hare will want to know about this letter today. Something moved across Clara's face. The composure held, but behind the glass, something shifted. Something that had been braced against impact loosened slightly, not because the impact hadn't come, but because it hadn't come alone. You think of things like that, she said. The legal angle. I think slowly, he said, but I get there. She almost smiled, not quite, but the almost was real. Write the letter, he said. I'll get paper for Cotter. She wrote to Eleanor for an hour. Nathan did not read what she wrote. He sat at the other end of the table with his own letter to Cotter, and they worked in parallel in the particular silence that had become one of the things he valued most about what they had built. Two people capable of occupying the same space with their own serious purposes, neither one diminishing the other. When she finished, she folded the letter and addressed it and set it aside. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the table for a moment. I told her the truth, Clara said. All of it. From the beginning. Good, Nathan said. She's going to be angry, Clara said. At me at first, for leaving, for causing this. She paused. And then maybe if I'm lucky she'll be angry at the right person. Give her time, Nathan said. I'm giving her everything I have, Clara said. Which at the moment is the truth and a reason to hope. She looked at Nathan. I told her about the investigation. I told her about Hare. I told her about Ruth Ellison. She paused. I told her about you. He looked up from his letter. What did you tell her? He said. Clara held his gaze. I told her that I walked into a situation I couldn't control and found a man who stood beside me without being asked to, she said. I told her that I had been wrong about what people were capable of. She paused. I told her that I was not coming back to Denver, that I had found work and a place that fit me, and that I was content. She said the last word carefully, like it was one she was still getting used to having permission to use. I told her I was content. Nathan looked at her. Is that true? He said. She met his eyes. Yes, she said, simply completely without the careful qualification she sometimes put around true things. Yes, Nathan, it's true. He went back to his letter, but he was not looking at it. So, Cotter's response came 4 days later, riding up the mountain with a deputy who handed Nathan the envelope and left without waiting for a reply, which meant the contents were urgent. Nathan brought it inside. Clara was at the kitchen table with the account ledger which she'd taken over so thoroughly in the past 3 months, that Nathan had more or less stopped pretending it was his responsibility. He read the letter standing up. "Cotter's spoken to Hare," he said. Clara looked up. "Hare agrees that the civil filing in Denver constitutes witness intimidation if it can be shown that it was filed in direct response to Clara's cooperation with the federal investigation," Nathan said. "The timing 4 days after our statements is significant." He kept reading. "Hare is moving to have the Denver filing flagged and held pending the outcome of the federal investigation. He's applied to a federal circuit judge who has jurisdiction over both Denver and Colorado Springs." He looked up. "Cotter says the application was filed this morning." Clara stood up from the table. "How long for a ruling on the hold?" she said. "Days," Nathan said. "Not months. A judge can issue an emergency hold within 48 hours if the intimidation argument holds." She pressed one hand flat on the table. Not dramatic, just grounding herself. "That means Eleanor's house would be protected from any action under the civil filing until the federal case resolves," Nathan said. "Yes." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "If the hold is granted," she said carefully. "If it is," Nathan said. She looked at the ceiling. Then she looked at him. "And if it isn't?" "Then Cotter has 2 more moves prepared," Nathan said. "He outlined them in the letter. He's not relying on one argument." Clara breathed. "He's a good judge," she said. "He is," Nathan said. "He's been waiting for a case strong enough to do this properly." He set the letter on the table. "Cotter says your statement gave him that case." Something moved across Clara's face that he'd seen before, but not quite like this, not this clean, not this unguarded. It was the expression of a person who has been carrying something alone for so long that the moment someone takes part of the weight, the relief is almost indistinguishable from grief. "I need a minute," she said. "Take it," he said. She went out onto the porch. He let her go. He stood in the kitchen with the letter in his hand and listened to the quiet of the cabin and thought about his father, saying this was the best summer of his life, and thought that his father had known something. Nathan was only now beginning to fully understand that a place became a home, not through ownership, but through what happened inside it, what was brought in and tended, what was allowed to grow. He put the letter beside the account ledger and went to make more coffee, because that was what he did, and it was enough of a reason to do something with his hands while he waited. She came back in when the coffee was ready. Her eyes were dry. She was not a woman who cried easily, or if she was, she did it in the private territory she'd always been careful to keep. But there was a quality to her face when she came back through the door, something rinsed clean, something that had been held and then released. She sat down. She picked up her coffee. "Thank you," she said, "for writing to Cotter immediately." "It was the right move," he said. "Nathan?" She said his name in the tone she used when she wanted him to actually receive something rather than deflect it. "Thank you." He met her eyes. "You're welcome," he said. The hold was granted in 36 hours. It arrived by telegraph to Cotter's office, who sent his deputy back up the mountain with the news, and Nathan read the telegram in the yard and stood with it for a moment, and then went to find Clara. She was in the paddock with Copper. 3 months of training had made the gelding almost unrecognizable, steady, responsive, the anxious energy channeled into something purposeful and controlled. He moved around her at a working trot, head-level, ears forward, every line of him expressing the specific equine calm that meant a horse had decided the world was manageable after all. Nathan watched them for a moment before he said anything. He always did this, stopped before announcing himself, took a breath of whatever was happening before he interrupted it. Old habit. Good one. "Clara," he said. She looked over. He held up the telegram. She stopped Copper with a word and came to the fence and took the telegram from his hand and read it. He watched her face. He'd gotten very good at watching her face. Her eyes moved across the words. Once. She looked up. "It's granted," she said. "It's granted," he said. She looked back at the telegram. Then she said very quietly to the paper, "Eleanor's safe." For now, Nathan said, until the federal case resolves. But yes. Clara stood at the paddock fence with the telegram in her hand, and Copper nosing at her shoulder from behind. And she did not move for a long moment, and Nathan did not move either, and the mountains were enormous and indifferent overhead, and the summer was turning at its edges toward the first cool breath of what would become fall, and it was one of those moments that arrives without announcement and stays without permission. I need to tell you something, Clara said. He looked at her. She turned from the fence and faced him. Her face was open in a way he had learned took a great deal of courage for her to allow. By the fire, she said. When you said what you said, I told you I needed to mean all of it before I said it. She held his eyes. I mean all of it now. Nathan was very still. Clara, I love you, she said. That's what I needed to say. I love you, and I am not saying it because I'm grateful, or because you've helped me, or because I don't have anywhere else to go. She took one step toward the fence between them. I'm saying it because you are the most honest person I have ever known. Because you made me shoes. Because you stood in front of a man who could have ruined you and told him the truth anyway. Because every morning when I come into the kitchen and the fire is going. Her voice caught slightly, then steadied. Every morning I know exactly where I am, and I know exactly who I'm with, and I am not afraid. I have not been afraid since I walked through your gate. She looked at him. That is what I needed to mean all of, and I mean all of it. Nathan Cole was a man who had spent 11 years learning to be adequate in silence. He stepped through the paddock gate. He crossed the 6 feet between them. He took her face in both his hands, those hands that showed every year of the work he'd put into this land, and he looked at her for a moment, and she looked back at him with those gray eyes that had never once looked away from anything. And then he kissed her, not urgently, not desperately, the way he did everything deliberately, with complete attention, like something worth doing. Right. She kissed him back. Copper behind them made a sound of supreme equine indifference and wandered toward the water trough. Torah. The federal case against Gerald Harrow was formally filed 6 weeks later. Nathan read the notification from Hare's office at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, while Clara poured coffee, and he read it twice before he told her what it said, because he wanted to be sure he understood it correctly before he spoke. 7 counts, he said. Clara set the coffee pot down. 7, she said. Fraudulent contractual coercion, Nathan said. 5 women. The notary fraud in Margaret Ellison's documentation opened the entire record. When Hare's investigators looked at the other 4 cases, they found the same notary signature on 3 of them. A man named Calvert, who had been struck from the notary rolls in Kansas in 1879, and had apparently followed Harrow's Operation West. He looked up. It's not just one case. It's a pattern across 4 years and 5 states. Clara sat down, slowly. 5 women, she said. 5 that they've documented, Nathan said. Hare's letter says there may be more they haven't yet identified. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then, Margaret's sister, Ruth. She came to the marshal's office. She's on the record, Nathan said. Her testimony about Calvert's signature was part of what opened the notary angle. And Eleanor, not directly involved in the federal case, Nathan said. But the civil filing Harrow made in Denver has been formally flagged as retaliatory. His Denver lawyers withdrew the filing last week, rather than have it used as additional evidence against him. Clara absorbed that. He withdrew it, she said. He withdrew it, Nathan confirmed. She looked at her coffee. Eleanor's safe, she said again. Not to him exactly, just to the room, just to make it real. Yes, Nathan said. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, I need to write to Ruth Ellison. I know, Nathan said. And to the other women, she said. If Hare will give me their names, they should know they should hear from someone who isn't a marshal or a lawyer that they're not alone in this. That other people know what was done and are saying so. She looked at Nathan. Will Hare do that? Share the names? I'll ask him, Nathan said. Would you? Today, he said. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Just that. Just the weight and warmth of her hand on his. Thank you, she said. Stop thanking me, he said. I'll stop when I stop meaning it, she said. He turned his hand over and held hers. There was a morning in October, the mountains already starting to go gold, and the air carrying that particular edge that meant summer was genuinely over, and winter was making its intentions known, when Nathan came out of the barn at first light and found Clara on the porch with Owen's guitar. She wasn't playing. She was just holding it, looking out at the mountains, the way she'd been looking at them since the first morning she'd stood at that kitchen window with a coffee cup and said, "It's beautiful," like she'd forgotten to be guarded. He came up onto the porch and sat in his chair. She looked at him. "I got a letter from Eleanor yesterday," she said. He'd known there was a letter. He'd seen it on the table when he came in for supper, and she'd been quiet through the meal in a specific way that meant she was still sitting with something. "How is she?" he said. "She's—" Clara paused. "She's angry, still. At the situation at Harrow, at the years she spent managing something that was never manageable." She touched the neck of the guitar. "At me a little. I think she's working through that." She paused again. "But she asked me something." "What?" "She asked me if I was happy." Clara looked out at the mountains. She asked it like it was a genuine question, like she wasn't sure the answer could possibly be yes, but she was asking anyway. She was quiet. I think she asked because she needed to know it was possible. That somewhere, someone who had run from the same thing she was still managing, that person had found something on the other side of it. Nathan looked at her. "What did you tell her?" he said. Clara looked at him directly. "I told her yes," she said. "I told her I was happy. I told her I woke up in the morning knowing where I was, and that the table was the right size, and that I was doing work that mattered, and that I was with someone who—" She stopped. The composure held, but it was a near thing. "I told her I was with someone who made me feel like my own worth was not a thing that had to be argued for, that it was just known, accepted, like the mountain." She looked at the mountains. Like something that didn't require a defense. Nathan sat with that. He sat with it for a long time, the way he sat with things, letting it settle into the right place, finding its weight, understanding what it was. Then he said, "Clara." She looked at him. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want to ask it plainly, the way I try to do most things." She waited. Her hands were still on the guitar, and her gray eyes were on his face, and she was completely present the way she always was, not performing attention, but actually giving it, which was one of the things he had loved about her since approximately the third morning. "Would you stay?" he said. Not as hired help, not as a woman who needed somewhere to land. He held her eyes. "As my wife, if you wanted that, as the person this table belongs to." He paused. "I know what you walked away from. I know what it cost you. I'm not asking you to trade one thing for another. I'm asking if you want this ranch, this work, this life as your own, as something you chose for yourself, not something that was arranged for you." He stopped. That's the whole question. Clara was very still. And then she did something he hadn't quite expected. She set the guitar against the porch rail, and she stood up from her chair, and she came to him, and she sat down on the porch step in front of his chair, and looked up at him, and it put her slightly below his eye level for once, which felt like she'd done it on purpose, like she was making a point about the direction of this. "Nathan Cole," she said. "I walked 4 miles on a rocky road in the dark. I showed up at your gate with everything I owned in a wooden box, and not enough sense to keep shoes on my feet." She looked at him steadily. "I told myself I was running toward work, that I just needed a place and a chance." She paused. "But I think I was running toward this, toward a man who would hand me a cup of coffee and not make me explain myself first, who would make shoes and leave them at the door and not need to be thanked." She put her hand on his knee. "Who would stand in front of Gerald Harrow and say she's my hired help, And that's the end of it without it costing him a second thought. Her voice was entirely steady. "Yes," she said. "I want to be your wife. I want this ranch and this work and this table and these mountains." She looked at him. "I want this life. Not because I need rescuing. Because it is the right life. Because you are the right man." She paused. "And because Duchess would never forgive me if I left." Nathan laughed. Actually laughed the full, unguarded kind that he had not had much occasion for in 11 years, the kind that comes from somewhere deep in a person, rather than from the surface of a pleasant moment. Clara was smiling, the real smile, the one she'd been letting him see more often, and that still hit him somewhere central every time. He reached down and took her hands. "Then it's settled," he said. "It's settled," she said. I check. They were married in November at the ranch, with Elias Bright officiating, and Cal Henderson standing up for Nathan, and a woman named Ruth Ellison, who had ridden from Pueblo and arrived the evening before, with red-rimmed eyes and a cake she'd baked for 3 hours, standing beside Clara. It was not a large wedding. It was exactly the right size. Myra Alderson came. Because Myra Alderson went everywhere, she made up her mind to go, and she sat in the front row with her arms crossed and her chin up, and when Elias got to the part where Nathan said, "I do," she made a sound under her breath that was not a cry exactly, but was in the general neighborhood of one. Afterward, she found Nathan by the coffee, and she said without preamble, "I told you so." "You did," Nathan said. "In front of Caldwell's store," she said. "I remember," he said. "And you still went and did it the slow way," she said. "I'm a slow thinker," Nathan said. "But I get there." Myra Alderson looked at him for a moment, with the expression of a woman who has lived long enough to know the difference between a man who is slow and a man who is careful, and has learned to value the second kind more than the world usually tells you to. "You did all right, Nathan Cole," she said. "Thank you, Myra," he said. She went back to her seat, and Nathan went to find his wife. A letter arrived from Deputy Marshal Hare in December. Gerald Harrow had entered a plea agreement with the Territorial Federal Court. 7 counts reduced to 5, all of them carrying financial penalties, and a permanent injunction barring him from entering into any debt-based contractual arrangement involving a third-party individual without full independent legal representation for that individual. The fraudulent notary Calvert was to be prosecuted separately. Harrow would not see a prison cell. The law in 1883 did not always reach the full distance of what justice required, but he would not practice what he had been practicing, and the 5 women whose names were on the federal record would have that record available to them for any future civil action they chose to pursue. Nathan read the letter at the kitchen table. Clara read it beside him, her shoulder against his, her coffee going cold in her hand. When they finished, she set the letter down. "It's not everything," she said. "No," Nathan said. "He won't face everything he should face." "No," Nathan said again. "But the women are on record," she said. "Their names, what was done." "Yes," he said. She was quiet. "I'm going to write to all 5 of them," she said. "Not just Ruth, all 5. She looked at the letter. "They should know that someone read their names and understood what those names cost." "I know you will," Nathan said. She looked at him. "And Margaret Ellison," she said. "Ruth's sister. She's been so frightened for so long." She paused. "I want to write to her too, not about the case, just as a person, as someone who understands what it is to be so frightened you can't move." She held his eyes. "And then to move anyway." "Write to her," Nathan said. "I'm going to need more paper," she said. "I'll get it next time I'm in town," he said. She looked at him for a moment with the expression he had come to know better than his own reflection, those gray eyes steady and warm and seeing everything. "You know what I keep thinking about," she said. "Tell me," he said. "That morning," she said, "when I walked up to your gate, I had been walking for 4 miles and my feet were cut, and I had everything I owned in one box, and I was terrified." She paused. "And you saw me from 200 yards away." I didn't know that then, but you've told me since. You saw me from 200 yards, and you slowed down. I did, he said. You didn't speed up, she said. You didn't turn around. You slowed down, and you came toward me carefully like I was something worth being careful with. He looked at her. You were, he said. You are. She put her hand over his on the table. That's the whole story, she said. Right there. A man who slowed down. Nathan Cole looked at his wife across the table that was finally the right size in the cabin his father had built, and his brother had laughed in, and he had spent 11 years eating supper alone, in with the mountains outside the window going white with December, and the horses in the barn, and the account ledger open, and Owen's guitar on the wall, and a wooden box on the shelf that held a letter Clara had written to herself on the night she decided to be brave. He thought about all the mornings between then and now. The shoes, the storm, the fire, the road to Colorado Springs, the fire by the creek and what he'd set across it, and what she'd given him in return. He thought about his father saying a man puts enough of himself into something, it changes you. He understood now that his father had not been talking about land. He had been talking about this, about the choosing, about the staying, about the slow, stubborn, unglamorous, absolutely necessary work of building something real with another person, day by day, fence post by fence post, morning by morning. Until one day you look up and understand that you are no longer the same man who started. You are better. You are home. Nathan turned his hand over and held his wife's hand in both of his, and outside the mountains, held the sky the way they always had, enormous and permanent and entirely indifferent to the small, luminous, irreplaceable thing happening inside one cabin at the edge of them. And that was enough. That was everything. That was exactly, precisely, completely enough.